Friar William smiled. "If I had been afraid, would I have come hither?" Mangu spoke in a new tone, as if trying to express his conviction. "We Mongols believe that there is no more than one God. We have an upright heart toward him. Without God's gift, that could not be." Mangu thought for a moment. "God hath given to the hand its 5 fingers, and as many faiths to men. To you he hath given the scriptures, yet you keep them not. Certainly you do not find it written in the scriptures that one of you should speak against another." Well, actually you do, but not just for speaking against another, No, and I made clear that I would not contend with anyone. I speak not of you in like manner. You will not find in the scriptures that you should forsake justice for money. When Friar William argued that he himself had refused to accept gifts of money, the Kakan motioned him to be silent. "I speak not of that," Mangu said. He drank thoughtfully from the cup in his hand. "God hath given you the scriptures, yet ye keep them not. To us he hath given soothsayers, and we give heed to them, and live in peace." And a lot of New Agers are going to make this same argument that while the friar waited to hear more of Mangu's belief, the Kakan considered. "You have been here long," he announced, and now I wish you to go back. You have said you dare not take my ambassador with you. Will you then take my messenger or my letters? If my lord's words can be clear to me, I will take them to the best of my power." Mangu then asked if the friar would have gold or silver, or fine garments. William would have none of these. He demanded only the expenses of his homeward journey and a safe conduct to Armenia. "I will have you taken there," Mangu assented, after which, "Look to yourself." For a moment he pondered. "There are 2 eyes in a head, yet both look to the same point. As one eye to the other is Batu to me. You came from Batu, and so you must return by him." When Friar William protested again, after his fashion, that he was a man of peace, knowing nothing of the mind of his lord king, and that he wished to dwell among the Mongols to preach, Mangu heard him out patiently. Then, musing, he said, "You have a long way to go. Make yourself strong with food." So Rubruk explains, he departed from the presence of the Kakan and returned not again. It was a pity, for the zealot Franciscan apparently did not understand Mangu's anxiety to forge a closer link between himself and the adventurous French king. The Kakan had a reason for that anxiety, but he had to express himself as best as he could in written words to a monarch he had never seen. "By the command of the everlasting sky, as there is only one sky, so on earth let there be one ruler. After Genghis Khan, by the power of the sky, this word is spoken to you, whether men may hear or horses may go." The command of Mangu, Kakan of the Mongols, to Ludovic, the king of the French, and all other lords and priests of the great world of the Franks, may they understand these words. "A certain man named David came to you, seeming to be an ambassador from the Mongols, but he was a liar. With him, your ambassador came to the Kakan. Since the Kakan Kuyuk was dead, your ambassador came to this court, and Ogul Gaimish, his wife, sent to you a gift. But how could that evil woman, viler than a female dog," I know that's not swearing, but people are going to take it that way if I say otherwise, "know the ways of war and peace? How could she settle the great world in quiet?" Well, animals are innocent. They don't have moral accountability, so everybody's, almost everybody's better than that. You try to be better than just an animal, but most people nowadays probably aren't. "The monks who came from you to Sartak were sent by Sartak to Batu, but as Mangu Khan is the foremost of the Mongol world, Batu sent them to us. And now that great world of the Franks may live in peace and enjoy their possessions, and that the commandment of the sky might be heard among you. We would have sent Mongols as ambassadors to you by your monk, but he could not take them. If we could give our commands in letters to King Ludovic, he agreed to carry them. For this reason, we have not sent our ambassadors. Instead, we have sent you this, the command of the everlasting sky, by your monk. And when you shall hear and believe it, send your ambassadors to us, so that we may know if you will have peace or war. When, by the power of the everlasting sky, the whole world shall be at one, in peace and rejoicing, from the rising place of the sun to where it sets, then shall it appear what we will do. But if you see and hear the command of the everlasting sky and heed it not, nor will believe it, thinking that our land is far beyond great mountains and the sea, if you, thinking so, lead an army against us, then only he that renders the hard way easy, and the far off near, only the everlasting sky knows what will befall. In this letter, a new thought is apparent. The wording is not the deceptive assurance of Batu, nor the rigid summons of Kuyuk. Mangu, groping for an understanding with the Western world, offers the traditional alternative of peace or war, but he respects his European adversaries. He warns them against confidence in war and summons them to come to an agreement which will secure their possessions under a Mongol peace. He is thinking not of war, but of the end of war. A strong intellect in touch with events is at work here. Mangu visualizes the unification of all peoples under one rule, from the rising place of the sun to where it sets. He is not concerned with enriching further the golden family, nor with seating the former tent dwellers and palaces. He ponders the fate of the civilized world under one emperor. He does not know what will come of it. Then he ends almost with despair. Shall it appear what we will do? No ambassadors came to him from the unfortunate Louis of France. On the road back to his king, Friar William passed out of the monarch, bound for Karakorum, to treat with Mangu, Haithon, king of the Armenians. Acknowledged himself to be the vassal of the Mongol Ordu, and he was given a yarlig that protected himself and his people against war. So on the frontier of the west, the Armenians, Georgians, Alani, and Russians had become subjects of the Mongol rule, bound to send contingents of armed men to the Mongol generals and to pay taxes to the Dorogashis. That was the price of security. The grandson, Mangu, more truly than Genghis Khan, held the destinies of Asia and Europe in his hands, a strange nature, Mongol in spirit, yet tempered by the wisdom of the outer world, holding fast to the Yasa and the code of the nomads, implacable, enduring. With all a steppe dweller's patience, he had the iron restraint that Genghis Khan had imposed upon himself, a grandson of the conqueror. He had known only victory. He had not shared in the ordeal of campaigning with his father, Tului, and he was much alone. He repaid his obligation to Batu with scrupulous care, and Batu always acknowledged his authority. Yet the cousins only met for a few months. After the European campaign, Mangu had no other intimate. His favorite wife, Kutuktai, remains only a name in the chronicles. No one person could influence Mangu, although he did not domineer like the Mongols of 2 generations before, who had dwelt in tents. He listened attentively to advice and formed his own judgments. He gave the government of China to a Turk, the aged and incorruptible Mahmud Yelvajd, and to Mahmud's son the administration of mid-Asia. When they asked for scholars to aid them, Mangu's curiosity was stirred. What are scholars, he asked. Are they as useful as physicians and soothsayers? More so. Yelvajd replied, and received permission to enlist what brains he desired. But it was Mangu, not Yelvajd, who made decisions. He gathered around him the hard souls of the tribes that had made a god of his grandsire and had built a wooden pagoda temple near the grave of Genghis Khan. He found relief in hunting. With his officers, he would mount the swift steppe mustangs and gallop out the black walls of Karakorum to the open plain, tossing up the Buragut, the golden eagles, trained to take large game. When he sighted antelope, the eagles would drive a beast from the antelope herd, and Mangu and his riders would overtake the quarry, while the eagles beat their wings about its head as the animals and men raced through the dust. For Mangu hated to be pent in Karakorum, sitting and listening to talk. Unlike Kublai, he had no patience with the extravagance of the women of the imperial house. He took from the women of the house of Ogadai their jewels and accumulated treasures. These he gave to the veteran officers of the home army. He even scolded his own women for buying too many precious things. What do they avail you? He asked, and therefore he kept account of the expenditures of his ladies. But he lacked the ordinary Mongol's itching fingers. When he examined the tax list with the Ovajj, he lowered the tax payments in China and Turkestan to 1 beast in 100, and silver in the same ratio. Teachers of religion and all those who could not earn a living he exempted from payment. Well, do you have to not earn a living to teach religion? I have it less at heart, he said, to fill my treasury than to preserve my people. Although he had detested Ogul Gaimesh, he ordered all the assignments drawn by Ogadai's women to be paid in full. At the same time, he deprived hundreds of scions of the Golden Family of their privilege of giving out drafts on the treasury. No longer could they sign a paper for others to pay, and he took away their tax exemption. Like Kuyuk, he detested luxury. Unlike Kuyuk, he had no desire for festivals and the wine of life. Silent and alone, he tried to forge the machinery of a world government, yet his strange nature could feel the need of beasts heavy with young in the herds during a blizzard. Mangu, however, could not rid himself of superstition. The tribal speakers to heaven he countenanced as fully as the Muslim mullahs. Although the Muslimin had become traditional enemies of the Mongols, had not Seer Kuktiti given money to build a masjid in Bokhara? He treated the 5 faiths as the 5 fingers of his hand. Secretly, the Buddhists said that Mangu believed Buddhism to be the palm of the hand, the one faith out of which the others sprang, but Mangu himself said not so. And how would you reason that out? Largely, the differences are like titles, right? If there is a God, surrender to that God would be, the faith. So Islam, even in the word. Christianity, you're striving for that experience, right? Judaism, you're trying to achieve the anointed consciousness, the example. In Judaism, you're following God's way. The words involved, Yehudi. But whatever other faiths you're going to add to that. In reality, the Mongols were discovering the attraction of new speakers to heaven. The Red Lamas of Tibet, their downright dealings with devils, their performance of miracles appealed to the steppe dwellers more than the renunciation taught by the Chinese. Mangu appointed such a lama, Namo, to be head of the faith in the empire. It was the first great lama from Tibet, the first Dalai. With incurable hope, Mangu summoned the different speakers to heaven to listen to their arguments. Was there, in fact, something within him that would live after death? Genghis Khan had asked Cha'ang Cha'un bluntly for an elixir of life, and had dismissed the matter from his mind when Cha'ang Un denied him, but Mangu was losing trust in the Taoist who made the greatest promises. From Tao, they said, was created the earth and human life governed by the twin forces of yin and yang, and a man's spirit might rise again to Tao as a flame flies upward, but Mangu did not perceive that the miracles predicted by the Taoist came to pass. He issued an imperial edict forbidding their false writings to be made into books. Wearying of this priestly disputation, Mangu turned both Taoist and Buddhist over to his milder brother, Kublai, who disliked the Taoist and placed his trust in a Chinese Buddhist. Kublai, after a huge debate at Xanadu, Shengtu, ordered the books of the Taoists to be burned. Like many others before them and since, the brothers Mangu and Kublai found no guidance in the speakers to heaven, the four brothers. As with the four sons of Genghis Khan, the four sons of Tolui and Sir Kuktiti had become the heads of the Mongol nation. But in the generation between the sons and the grandsons, between 1227 and 1250, a change had taken place. For one thing, the Tsar Khan Batu, their cousin, now reigned alone in the west, 3,000 miles distant from the gilded halls of Karakorum. Yeah. For another, the three younger brothers did not pretend to hold authority. They deferred to Mangu, the Khan. He alone sat on the felt-covered throne, and he alone could hold the loyalty of the elder Mongols, who still talk among themselves of the Sultan of Genghis Khan. Except for these four and Batu, the Golden Family had become a shadowy kind of assemblage. Owing to its swift breeding of children, the blood relationship had swelled from several hundred to more than 2,000 grandsons and great-grandsons. They had become pensioners of the throne beside Mangu's purge, had exiled Kaidu and other survivors of the house of Ogadai into the pastures of mid-Asia, where they kept themselves apart from all family councils. In the home grazing lands near Lake Baikal, the younger spirits of the Golden Family, who had tasted the luxury of a few years before, complained bitterly of the hard-living Mangu enforced. The observant Friar William pointed out that the men of the home tribes were poor, and that they all had to work. The four brothers had been educated by Sir Kuktiti, not by Genghis Khan. After their mother's death, this difference in their minds appeared more clearly. They were loyal enough to the eldest, Mangu, but they had ideas of their own. Hulagu, good-natured and warlike, was influenced by his first wife, Doku's Khatun. She was a Kira'it, a niece of the great chieftain who had been called Prester John, and she had been Hulagu's stepmother before he married her. Being a Kira'it, she was wise in tribal law, and she prayed with the Nestorian Christians. Kublai had a love for things Chinese and a mild spirit. He collected rare gems, and he liked to pass his time in gardens. He leaned on the counsel of Yao Chao, an ascetic. Of the three, perhaps Arik Buka, the little man, was Mangu's favorite. The little man was the youngest. He had his father's recklessness and a craving for the ancestral nomad life. Mangu did not take long to make his decision. He would carry out the testament of his grandsire. He would divide the great Mongol army among his three brothers to carry on the conquest of the known world. He proposed this plan himself, Rashid relates, because there remained kingdoms which had not been conquered under the reign of Genghis Khan. Since these kingdoms were at an immense distance, he chose to send one of his brothers toward each of them, himself remaining in the center of his empire to administer justice to his subjects. In this vast offensive against civilization, Mangu spared Western Europe for the time being. That belonged now to Batu, and besides, Mangu hoped that the armies of the Crusaders might be of aid to his brother Hulagu. The new attack went out, as Rashid says, almost to the full extent of the settled areas of the earth, to push Mangu's frontiers from the China Sea far along the shores of the Mediterranean. An advance expedition struck through the mountains at northern India by way of Lahore. A second army moved into Korea. In 1253, Kublai was ordered to march against the Sung Empire in southern China that had never been invaded by the frontiersmen. The Mongol army in the southwest moved farther into Asia Minor, while Hulagu began his advance with a strong ordu against the remaining powers of Islam. Well, Muslim majority and powers of Islam are not quite the same thing. Strangely enough, Mangu ordered him to eliminate the Caliph of Baghdad and the assassins, that secret fellowship of the Ismailites that held mountain strongholds from Kohistan of Persia to the Lebanon, and had not until now been attacked with success. Hulagu was to continue on toward the west to reduce Egypt, the furthest citadel of Islamic military power, the general attack. The way had been prepared. By now the Mongols had pushed the road building to the far frontiers. The ancient road of the frontiersmen had become a highway, with post houses a day's ride apart. These post houses had sleeping quarters, food service, and herds of horses for remounts in the corrals. A Chinese mandarin at each post checked in the travelers and recorded the time of their departure in his books. Couriers of the army galloped in with dispatches, handing them over to waiting riders to carry on. It was a medieval pony express. It was called the Yam, and the riders were chapars. At times, a Mongol horseman would appear with a dust cloud behind him, his body bound tight with leather bands, his greased face half covered by the bells at his saddle. He would be known as a courier of the Khan, and a fast horse would be waiting for him when he pulled up. Then a Mongol Noyan might arrive at the post station, bearing a yerlig of Khan, giving him authority to commandeer all horses for his own use. These new post roads spread over the old Silk Route and across the mountain ranges where the gorges and rivers had not been bridged before. They offered easy routes to the long caravans that were moving now between west and east. Over such a Mongol road stout Friar William was carried like an express packet back to Batu. From Karakorum to the court of Batu, he relates, we journeyed for 4 months and 10 days. During all that time we never saw a town, nor did we ever rest, except one day when we could not get horses. Sometimes we had to go 2 or even 3 days with no other food than mare's milk. Mangu was devoting most of his tax revenues to the finishing of these transcontinental routes, the building of army posts, and the increase of the remount herds. The Mongols in the homeland were put again on military rations. Most of the able-bodied men in the former tribal areas were allotted to the new armies, which far exceeded the forces commanded by Genghis Khan or Subutai. 2 men in every 10 were requisitioned for Hulagu's ordu alone, and their work in the home yurts was turned over to the lads and elder nomads. These recruits for the new armies joined to the frontiers to be mustered in, where the military commanders took them over. Here, grazing lands had been allotted for the new commands, and warehouses of grain and wine opened for them. They also received their arms here, for in the heart of Mangu's empire, the Mongols no longer carried weapons. Friar William relates that a guard of 20 Tatars was given him for escort on the road through the Caucasus, where the mountain people still raided the Mongol herds. I was glad of this, as I had never seen the Tartars armed, yet of the 20, only 2 had coats of mail, which they said they had bought from Alani. The Mongol economy that had built up the roads and military supplies had done away with the old village economy. In these years, when most of the men were requisitioned for service, the irrigation works and cultivation were neglected. A good deal of food had to be imported from agricultural regions outside. Moreover, the famines and plagues that followed the major campaigns, although not affecting the Mongols themselves, had taken toll of life along the frontiers. Friar William passed over the deserts where no water was visible for 2 days. Slowly, the earth itself was depriving the Mongols of its support. Mungu gave his younger brother a word of advice at parting. Heed well the words of Princess Dokuz, he bade them, and follow her advice. And he asked Hulagu to send back to Karakorum the celebrated astrologer Nasr ad-Din, who was then serving the assassins. Perhaps Mungu hoped that the talented Muslim reader of the stars might reveal secrets that had escaped the Taoist and even the Red Lama of Tibet. At all events, there is no mistaking Mungu's intention to give a Christian ascendancy to this expedition. Dokuz Khatun, Hulagu's favorite, was an Nestorian. Hulagu himself was son of Sirt Kuktiti, a Nestorian Kitboga. The chief general of the expedition was a Christian. Mungu had just extended his protection to those warlike Christians, the Armenians and the Georgians, and he had asked urgently for ambassadors from the Christian crusader Louis of France, who was then supposed to be in the Holy Land, although by the time Friar William reached Louis, that unfortunate monarch had returned defeated to France. Mungu had no intention of waging a religious war. He was simply making use of Christian fanaticism to gain useful allies in his movement to crush the remaining military force of Islam. Now, fanaticism as in this kind of sounds like the use of hate speech for fanaticism, but there's zeal and fanaticism is not quite the same thing, is it? But the title over the principles, that's what was needed for the Crusades to be their thing, even though there certainly was teachings. The Crusades were less about the teachings of Christianity than spreading the label. Hulagu departed with a great army of occupation with a division of Chinese engineers and some experts equipped with a new weapon, naphtha flamethrowers, with geographers to draw the plan of the new conquerors, of the new conquest, and tax assessors and road builders to extend the post stations westward. And Hulagu followed his brother's advice, breaking all Mongol precedent. He gave Dokuz Khatun a place beside him in his council, and he listened to her advice. Until then, the southwest had been a kind of military frontier. In 1229, a general of the bodyguard, Chermagan, had been sent there with 3 tumans to maintain order. Later, after the death of Tului, 4 officers representing the various houses of the Golden Family, including Sirt Kuktiti, had been ordered out there to govern Khorasan. Meanwhile, Chermagan, an able commander, had found ideal winter quarters in the high grazing lands farther on, between the edge of the Caspian and the shore of the Mediterranean. Azerbaijan, Armenia, northern Iraq, Iran. He had punished Georgia, but left it self-ruled after the suicide of its queen. Rusudan, Kerman, and Fars had submitted. In 1241 of the Common Era, Chermagan had become paralyzed. Trakina and Kuyuk then sent out another general, Baidu or Baichu, to take over. So, the northern belt of the Islamic lands above the hot irrigated regions had become a military frontier administered by Baidu. Roughly, the Mongol conquest extended along the ancient Silk Route. At the western end, a strange conglomeration of peoples struggled. The Byzantines of Constantinople at feud with the strong Turkish Seljuks, the remnants of the Khwarezmians driven back upon the Syrian Muslims still at war with the Crusaders on the coast, and beyond them the growing power of the Mamluks, or slave warriors of Egypt. And remember that Islam does not allow wars to capture slaves. And they don't allow slaves to be treated as bad as most companies would treat an employee. Toward this troubled west, Hulagu moved as slowly as a juggernaut, but with the same implacable power across the barrier ranges, skirting the snows of Tibet, hunting and holding high festival in his perambulating court, greeting the lords of the mountain clans who came in to pay tribute to such magnificence. Resistance would have been madness, and Hulagu had a way of laughing off wars. In fact, he laughed off at most things. He relished the melons of Samarkand, and he was insatiably curious about the mirages in the Red Sands Desert, where lakes and fertile forests appeared to the sight that vanished when he rode up to them. He even let Doku's Khatun bring along her traveling chapel with the wooden plaques that beat loudly to prayer. All things that amused people seemed good to this conqueror with a sense of humor. When he came to the strangest citadels of earth, the eagle's nests of the assassins who would terrorize this region for 6 generations, he searched them out and obliterated them patiently. His riders broke into the artificial paradise of Alamut, where the old man of the mountain had drugged the youth of Persia to make knife slayers out of them, and they hunted down the Grand Master of the assassins after burning his library of occult books. Hulagu thought that Mangu would like to see such a curiosity, and he started the captive master on the journey back to Kara Korum. When Mangu wrote that he had no wish to see him, so the master was strangled like any other man, like any ordinary man. Well, see, that's a problem. You want people who have knowledge beyond the books, and just because someone has a book doesn't mean they believe and do everything in the book, right? Even if it's a religious book. Now, if they only have books of one faith, that might be different. Established the laws of Genghis Khan, Mangu reminded his wandering brother from Samarkand to the far side of Egypt. Be generous to those who submit to your orders, humiliate those who disobey.